Very warm welcome. NIBA's last webinar of the year focused on our latest bit of research called Ready or Reacting. This is going to be an interactive session. I'm joined by three fabulous colleagues, Broker of the Year, Caleb Richards, Alana Devitt, who is our lead researcher from CoreData, and Leigh Frost, who is our EGM at CBN and our partner on this project. Really warm welcome to you folks. In terms of the format, I'm just going to do a very quick intro of the research headlines. If any of you were at the convention, apologies, it's a little bit of a repeat. I'm then going to have a quick chat with Alana as lead researcher with her insights, and then we'll open a broader conversation with Caleb, Leigh, and Alana on some of the key things. So look, very, very briefly, the frame up is the why we're doing this research. It's actually the first of about 5 or 6 different pieces of research. And earlier this year, really from around July onwards, NIBA's been in field asking members a whole bunch of questions about all sorts of things around the future of broking, the issues in their practices and businesses, things about their clients, what worries them, what excites them, and so on. So we've been asking 4 different sets of stakeholders, if you will. The first one, of course, is NIBA members, and we did the big research and surveys with those folks. The second group of people is Alana and her team then went and interviewed probably the 13 key leaders and leadership teams across the sector. That's what we call qualitative research. The third group of people is we've most recently been interviewing with Quant Surveys customers who use brokers, and we'll launch that into the new year, but some really early run exciting data coming out of that. And the final group of people we interviewed was basically doing case studies with members of NIBA about their journey. And so all of that has gone into effectively a big data bucket, out of which is now coming a range of reports. And the very first of those reports is called Ready or Reacting. It was framed around what does the future of broking look like into 2035. And so some really interesting findings coming out of that. So one of the things we wanted to understand from people across the broking community is, so what are the big issues that you're facing into, and how prepared are you? And so if you look at this slide here, starting from the top at 12 o'clock, you can see the regulatory demands is the top rated issue in terms of the impact on the profession. And then the second part of this is, so how ready are people for regulatory change? And what you can see in all of the different topic areas is that there's a key area of focus, but there's a gap between the issue and being ready for it. And I think that's going to really help the sector focus on the things that really, really matter. So if you start at 12 o'clock, you can see the regulatory demands. At 11 o'clock, we're all facing into a world of automation, technology, and AI, some for good, some a little scary. And so the impact on those kind of issues about how we use tech and automation definitely steering into in a big way. And look, last one, if I just take you down to 6 o'clock on this clock, which is really the focus that's starting to come back loud and clear, not only from within all the survey work, but certainly as a headline from a lot of the consumer work, is positioning brokers as the strategic advisor at the front end of a professional relationship. If you think about the world that we and you folks as brokers all inhabit, it's working with clients and helping them to kind of understand, unpack the risks that they face, but then ultimately navigate where the right answer lies. And then once the placement is done and claim time turns up, significant work takes place at claim time. And so that kind of repositioning of broker as from just broker, in inverted commas, to broker as strategic advisor is a big thematic coming through loud and clear. And we'll kind of unpack that with the panel. I'm not going to cover all of them in this. It's just really a quick dip into a couple of the key themes. On the next slide, what we then ask people to do is to rank the level of disruption across those 8 topic areas. And what you can see here is that tech, automation, AI is seen as the biggest area of disruption. I'm in my travels, I see businesses responding exceptionally well. They're kind of ahead of the change curve, but tech and automation, it's one of those things, if you get behind, it's pretty easy to get further behind and then further behind. The reverse is also true. The couple of areas at the very bottom there, talking about education, which has been a big theme through NIBA all year, and also the changes, the workforce changes coming through with a generation on the cusp of retirement, a new generation joining the sector. There brings challenges and opportunities for all of us. And so with that, it's really designed to give you a little bit of a flavor. But I thought to start off with, Alana, I'd just throw to you. You do lots and lots of research across many different parts of the financial services sector. How did you find this research, and what were some of the most surprising insights?
Yeah, no, thanks, Richard. Yeah, at CoreData, I look after a lot of our research in superannuation, with financial advisors, a few mortgage brokers as well. So it is quite interesting getting this lens of the sector in particular. And you sometimes can't help compare sectors, but why this research was just so interesting for us was the level of in-depthness that we went with it. We really went all over across the entire industry, up, down, sideways, in between, right up to leadership teams, down to sort of your junior brokers with those case study style interviews. It was really interesting to kind of get that insight from all levels. And I think looking at it, especially sort of as you were saying there, Richard, around the disruption scores, what I find quite interesting is when you start looking at those scores and sort of who is maybe a little bit more focused on certain sort of disruptions than others, and how the size of different firms definitely plays into who's focusing on what. So one of the things I quite find interesting, and it kind of was confirmed for us as well in the interviews as well, is that, for some of the smaller guys, really their focus is on the immediate, which is a lot of that regulation that have come through, and the informed consent, and that's still kind of quite top of mind for them. But then when you kind of take a look through the data, and if anybody has read the report, it is quite interesting when you start getting to the nuances of some of the larger firms and how much that they are pursuing technology and automation. That's kind of like the golden egg to help, alleviate some of these disruptions, and being ultimately super prepared, for these upcoming trends in the next sort of 5 to 10 years. It's very interesting.
Because Alana, in the report, and for those of you who haven't seen it, folks, it's definitely on the NIBA website. But for those of you who haven't seen the report, the report unpacks really ages and stages, locations of the broking community, right? And as you say, it's very different depending on whether you're in the city or the regions, whether you're part of a global corporate business or a much more regional business, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, it does. And that's interesting in a sense, but I can imagine, all the brokers and everybody on this call today, what you're actually interested in is understanding, well, what drives that preparedness? Like, what actually makes me ready for those upcoming disruptions? How do I get ready? How can I kind of combat that? And what we looked at the sort of broker firms that are more prepared for these disruptions, the level of tech integration within the overall business structure is a huge driver of how prepared a firm is, for these upcoming trends. So the guys that have that really highly integrated systems that talk to each other, that, are very agile and can change quite quickly, they are not getting kind of bogged down by the sort of admin tasks, and are able to just focus at a much higher level at growth, and at sort of, making sure that they're providing really high quality advice to their clients. And they're like much more up in that sort of strategy area, because they're not getting bogged down by sort of the admin tasks that sort of anybody struggling with maybe the lower integration systems are still sort of focused on getting through those tasks. And the other one that was quite interesting that we found quite funny, and was actually quite similar to financial advisors, they are like this as well. Whereas the firms that are really focused on growth in the next 5, 10 years, so really looking to grow their client books and grow in size, they are much more in a position to be much more prepared for these upcoming disruptions. So they're just much more already in that mindset of how do we make decisions really quickly? How do we have clear, detailed strategies? How do we move on our feet and kind of combat those challenges? And they're just ultimately then much more prepared for kind of things that are upcoming in the next few years.
That's awesome. And that really kind of comes to a bit of a leadership mindset, right? Strategic forward look view.
Yeah, absolutely. And when, we got to be in the room with some of these leadership teams across the sector, it was really interesting to start to see this play out already. So, some of the teams that we talked to had already sent their executives to Harvard to really learn AI from the top down to be able to come back, to the firm and start implementing those things straight away. And even, some of the leadership teams talking about the way, Amazon or Apple have really brought innovation into their firms and how they can ultimately do that as well. And sort of like you were saying there, Richard, in the one of the disruption trends, we've got a new workforce changes coming up, but a lot of these leadership teams are actually embracing this. And really the ones that are really preparing are looking at, well, how can I get people from different sectors who might already have a little bit more knowledge in some of these spaces into my team so that they can help drive that innovation.
Hey, look, last one for you, Alana, and this kind of picks up this new risk landscape.
Yeah.
So there's cyber threats, there's weather events, the kind of risks that businesses are facing into. And Leigh and Caleb, I'll bring you into this conversation in just a moment. But that kind of start to come through fairly forthrightly as well, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it came up quite a bit, came up in our conversations with those leadership teams around how we're sort of preparing clients for that as well, how we kind of give that advice, and then how, that new risk landscape is ultimately driving that change for the role of a broker into more of that risk advisor. And I won't go too much into it, but even in our consumer research is sort of coming through now, and the data that we're looking in that the expectations of clients is also expecting kind of that, their broker helps them, understand what products can be available to them to maybe alleviate risk within their business that they wouldn't have been able to do before.
Awesome. Thanks, Alana. Guys, welcome. I'm going to invite you perhaps to introduce yourselves, tell us a bit about your journey. And Caleb, I'll start with you. Perhaps a bit about your journey and perhaps your overarching insight on the research, anything that kind of surprised you. And of course, the frame up is you are a couple of months on from winning NIBA's Broker of the Year for 2025. So big congrats to you. And perhaps you can fold that into your self-intro.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Look, kicked off in claims, so started, I guess, at the essential end of what we do and why we do what we do. Very fortunate to have that as my grounding. Fell into insurance like many people, many of the listeners or viewers today. And since then, I've just taken, any opportunity I could to, build, I guess, my own toolkit, my own resources, build my relationships, and as a result, I've had a really good journey and build a fantastic career and come to really appreciate, a pretty amazing industry. So, most recently that's culminated in, having the experience with NIBA and the Broker for the Year with CGU. It's been great.
And Caleb, what drew you into broking initially?
No, I quite literally fell into it. It was an introduction to the industry. I like the concept of being able to represent and advocate for a client. That's probably what resonated with me. And then from there, I guess I really just built on that, and I'm still very, very passionate. I still run, my own claims and have those battles, and just ensure that you set the contract right for the client and you deliver it at the end when something goes wrong way out.
You and I have had a few conversations about the sort of risks you cover. You're based out in Wagga. Can you just paint a little bit of that picture, given your AgriRisk background in your on your screen then?
Yeah. So, recently into AgriRisk. Always been passionate about agriculture, growing up in a small regional community on an apple orchard. Look, the agri side of it, I just think there's a lot of opportunity there with AgriRisk. We're really building on the diversity, and there's a lot of opportunity in Australia. It's the backbone, in my view, of the Australian economy, right throughout. So, like in regional areas, I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to develop skills. A lot of people that have transferable skills, and that's something that appealed to me about the report, because it obviously touches on workforce changes and talent and the need for uplift, and that's certainly a big opportunity and something that I'm going to be tackling.
Fantastic. Thanks, Caleb. And Leigh, over to you. Welcome. CBN kind of very early on supported this research.
Yes.
So perhaps, self-intro and tell us about your journey into the sector.
Of course. Firstly, a huge thank you to you, Richard, and to the broader NIBA team for allowing us to be part of this research. Obviously, the whole ready or reacting piece and the future of broking was something we were really passionate about at CBN. And it was kind of a joint effort to get this up and running, and really pleased with the report as it's come out, and some great insights there, which I'm sure we'll unpack over the next 45 minutes or so. So for me, my journey actually started in finance, so banking side of the business, and I had an opportunity going back sort of 15, 20 years ago to exit out of that and transition into the broking side with Aon. That opportunity for me came at the right time. I thought at the time, sort of naively, that I was skilled enough to be a little bit product agnostic as a leader, but I quickly understood that, you needed a really firm grasp on a number of different industries to be any chance of surviving in broking. So my first sojourn was around construction insurance, and specifically builder's warranty, which, as many of you would know, is more akin to a financial product. So it was kind of a soft landing for me. But I've worked with sort of a couple of the internationals in Aon and Willis Towers Watson, and more recently with Community Broker Network.
Fantastic. Hey, Leigh, I'll stay with you on this, and folks, feel free to join the conversation as you like, remembering there's a Q&A button down the bottom. Leigh, I'm going to go to the report specifically.
Yes.
We've just given an early run taste of some of the key findings. From your point of view and with your experience, what kind of stood out?
Yeah.
And did those big 8 issues kind of resonate?
So yes is the short answer. And I guess for me, I feel like the top couple in regulation and innovation are things that if we were to ask any of the brokers on the line here today listening, they'd kind of pick those in their top 2 or 3 as well. But as is usually the case, I'll be a bit of a contrarian, and I'll pick on innovation in insurance products was kind of one that really stuck out to me. So one of the things I'd say there is, if you actually look at the ratings, it's kind of midway down in terms of disruption from the report, but it's really, really quite high, and I think almost the highest in terms of preparedness. So that for me sounds a little bit of a warning bell around where we're all sitting or how we're all feeling around readiness for product innovation. So for us, I guess we're seeing more and more industry expansion into industries that didn't maybe exist 6 or 12 months ago. So that creates a huge challenge for us and our brokers in our network around finding solutions for clients where they perhaps don't exist today. So for me, again, one of the key insights in the report was that more and more brokers want to be involved in that process. They want to actually drive innovation, talk to insurers around design, testing, strategic partnerships to help their clients. And I guess my broad observation, quite broad, I will say, is that a lot of the mainstream insurers are less and less enamored with that idea of being innovative and sort of almost outsourcing that by way of MGAs. And we're seeing a lot more of that, I guess, out in the industry at the moment, which does create an opportunity for innovation. Now, again, that's quite a broad view, but I think if brokers are wanting to get involved in that innovation side, which the report would lean towards, there's a real sense that that's becoming harder and harder out in the marketplace, Richard. So for me, just innovation around products was one of the key standouts, and just making sure, I guess, we as an industry are supporting brokers in connecting them with service providers who can give those innovative solutions.
Yeah, thanks, Leigh. Hey, Caleb, what particularly stood out for you out of the report, given you're very much on the front line and you're also on the front line of the regions?
Yeah, look, the immediate thing that jumped out, I think that we all need to remember is that each one of these points is really we've got to consider in line with the standard deviation from our client, and the client has to be at the center. I know in the image, I think it's really important that maybe we put the client in the middle of that, because everything we do is obviously relative to the client need at any given time, and the rate at which we adopt that is really consummate with them. So I think that's really critical, just to acknowledge that. The one that really jumped out at me, and I would probably, I don't have the data to challenge it, but to me, the idea that the strategic advisor and education uplift, I think they should be the other way around, because I don't think you can build on that sort of ability to, develop strategic advisors in the absence of first better educating, up and coming and existing brokers. So I think that had just been an important one to potentially flip around the other way, to make sure that to achieve that ideal strategic advisor badge, which is an honour to get to that stage, I think we need to work on how we better educate, people within our industry.
So you and I have had some offline conversations on this topic. I mean, from your point of view, what's the right kind of pathway educationally for people to jump in, and how do you keep, how do we keep our tools sharp? How do we keep always on in terms of improving and honing our profession and our craft?
Yes, I think, and the reason that's a difficult question is because if we look at the workforce change, which is again number 8, I think on the score, we've got a rate of IP, which is the most senior people in our industry that are actually exiting, retiring, whatever they might be going on to. I think that in itself creates a challenge, because it might only be sort of 30-odd% of the industry that's per head count that's leaving. But if you looked at that as collective IP, as in they've been in the industry 20 years, 30 years, the IP that void is going to be a lot more significant than 30%. I think one initiative, and it's just something I've adopted personally, I steal from everyone I can in relation to senior people that, are sharp and that have been there and done it before. You can learn a lot from them. I'd encourage any young person to, attack any sort of senior person that's in your business. I know that NIBA's got the mentor program available, so anything that can help you upskill yourself, you're at the very least, I would say 50% responsible for your own betterment. And then the business that you work with, of course, can then, adopt other initiatives. And that could be anything from, well, I don't like e-learns myself, but they're absolutely, a resource you need to use. But the rest is tapping into that senior person and or people that are within your sphere.
Thanks, Caleb. I'll just jump to Alana, because Alana, you and I were talking yesterday about this topic, and it's straight out of the consumer research, right?
Yeah.
So whilst it's easy to say, hey, we want to be positioned as strategic risk advisors, that's actually in the eye of the client, to Caleb's point.
Yeah, and I think there's a few things with this one as well. I actually think Caleb makes a really great point, because when you look at the disruption score and that hard ranking, it's actually a few different questions actually calculated together to actually make that ranking. So when you look at it, is a combination of the level of impact that is seen on the profession, the likelihood they think it's going to happen, and then the level of preparedness. And the reason why it's actually flipped that way is that preparedness in terms of that education uplift, brokers are actually more prepared for that than they are to be a strategic advisor. So I think Caleb makes a great point around, to that education uplift is what's going to help bring brokers more into that role of being a strategic advisor, and the two kind of falling together hand in hand. And like you said there, Richard, like what we were talking about yesterday with the consumer research that will be sort of out next year, we ask kind of a similar style question in that piece of research, and we look at how prepared clients are for brokers to be strategic advisors. And it's like 80% of clients are ready for their broker to be a strategic advisor. And that actually even increases for sort of larger, medium to large businesses. So there's definitely an increase in expectation there that clients really want that and are really needing that.
Yeah, because the greater the complexity, the greater the need for someone to help, navigate that complexity and solve the problems, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think their broker for them up until this point has been a real true business partner. So they just kind of want to keep that going. They want to bring their brokers even more so into the business, especially as it grows in size, as the whole landscape, like we said, just looks really different in the next 10 years. And clients really see their brokers being an integral part for them to sort of navigate that complexity.
Nice. Hey, Leigh, just back to you briefly. I'm just going to change gears briefly.
Of course.
In the big 8 issues, two of the biggest ones, as I mentioned, was the technology and the regulatory issue. From your point of view at CBN, how do you folks see technology kind of shaping or reshaping the role of broker over the next 5-10 years?
Yeah. So what I might do, Richard, I might just link back to a couple of points that Caleb and Alana just made there as well. So, and then come back around to that question. So for me, one of the issues around the ability to get to that trusted advisor status is, quite frankly, time. Right? Everyone's time poor. And the more, and we'll talk about this shortly, but the more legislative change that's coming through, it seems the more paper heavy that actually running through the process becomes. So for me, it's kind of all intrinsically linked here. So we're burdened with more compliance and legislative requirements, which means we're doing more repetitive work, which, if we link back around to the tech and automation, is something that we can actually use to take some of that administrative burden away. So how do we actually become that trusted advisor, have the time to become that trusted advisor that is using tech and automation to become more efficient at that? So I thought I'd just link that back before I dive into sort of my thoughts on where tech and automation are going. But for me, I think, Richard, for us in the next piece, it is very much around giving support services to the brokers. And we've invested with a joint venture partner in a virtual assistant, which I think is the next step for us. And I can see that evolving over the coming years. So for us, at its very early stages, it has sort of policy comparison. It has the ability to draft slips. It can suggest where you might place risks. So it's very much learning as it goes, as AI does. But for us, I think for the next sort of horizon, what I can see is a lot of those menial tasks being taken away, which actually allows us to add value and links back to that trusted advisor space.
Nice. I'll just stay with you on that one, because the regulatory impost, is pretty well understood right across the Australian business environment.
Yes.
As being expensive and costly, and in the end, all that cost ends up costing customers. Whilst it costs brokers and broking houses time and money, it ultimately costs customers. How are you thinking about kind of this regulatory complexity and helping your brokers simplify it or kind of manage it and so on?
We've all, as an industry, got very adept at introducing and re-engineering process to meet legislative change. It just seems, Richard, each time we look over the horizon, there's something else coming our way. So I think as an industry, we've kind of got a reasonable process and understanding around how that works. Now, does that make it any easier? Absolutely, it doesn't. But for us, what we're investing in is really those tools that we were talking about there to try and automate what's coming around the corner. I guess just as a side comment as well, one of the observations of some of the more recent changes that have occurred is that while they've all been put in place with the client in mind, and certainly trying to address issues that have been identified by various reports, I don't think some of the changes that have come down the line, unfortunately, are addressing some of the core issues for consumers. So I think for us, there's more work to be done in terms of that consumer protection piece, just to be more efficient in the delivery of some of the outcomes that they're looking to drive. Now, a lot of that falls back to, I guess, yourselves and the team around your ability to negotiate with government and legislation makers around how we can implement this. But certainly, I think as an industry, we've become very adept at implementation, and we will continue to invest in automation to try and make it easier for the network to deliver what's required to be compliant.
Oh, nice. I'll come back to the political advocacy conversation in a moment, but you're exactly right. Okay, Caleb, your thoughts on the topic in terms of efficiencies that you see coming through at the front line for you to make it a bit easier?
Yeah, look, I think that's the opportunity. Whilst it's a fear, the opportunity is, I think, using AI and the tech and see it more as an opportunity and a tool than taking over or taking people's jobs. I think it will drive some efficiencies. I think it's going to take us a while, as it will take our clients a while, to actually consolidate that into their supply chains. So I think that's going to be a challenge that, again, we will have to adopt it in line with our client adoption to it in some sense. If we can beat them to the chase and, help how we communicate, I think, namely with the clients, that will be the big opportunity. But outside of that, I think we just need to, recognise it as a tool to help us be better at what we do and better deliver outcomes to the client.
Fantastic. Caleb, I'm going to stay with you if I can and just segue into the discussion around kind of clients, customer expectations, how changing are they? What do they expect from us as a profession? I mean, what are you seeing in your client base?
Look, I'll touch very briefly on what Leigh was just addressing there as well, because I think we need to remind the regulators that their response is to protect the consumer. And I think our communication on that, for various reasons, getting through the political, environment, we've probably, failed at that because we haven't been able to get that voice through. And inadvertently, the very person they're trying to protect is now being prejudiced, which is a big issue. So I think we all just have to open up and try and be more transparent with them to protect the end consumer and help the insurers, because at the end of the day, it's the insurers that, it's costing them and therefore costing us and costing the customer, which is obviously very backwards if you look at all that in its simplest form. But look, the consumers that I think there's going to be all the early adopters to AI. But if you look at the bulk, let's just say that there's the first 15 or 20 that jump to it. The rest at the moment, the 60, we'll call it, that sit in the middle, it's going to take them quite a while. And I think the fear of AI and their lack of understanding of it actually means they're going to be more dependent on us, because they don't trust that, but they do trust you. If you're worth your salt, they will know you, they will trust your advice, and they will want to consult with you. And when you educate your client properly, they should be consulting with you ahead of decisions, not after a decision's being made. And that's a really important thing to prepare your client for, is making sure they understand that. And when you do that properly, the clients will, their trust grows for you, and as does, their network, and, therefore you do sort of grow. And that's, I've seen that across, anything from the bottom end of, small clients right the way through to globals. That concept in the human connection and trust doesn't change regardless of the dollars on the end of the, on the end of their turnover.
Do you think, is that just the Caleb Richards way of operating, or do you kind of see that as an important thing across the sector, that being the trusted advisor, and you mentioned the T word several times there, and I think you're spot on, that in the end, the essence of the relationship between broker and client is trust that holds it together. Is that something that you see widely, broadly? Is that something we as a sector need to work on?
Yeah, well, I think it directly correlates with this point as the strategic advisor. As an industry, we need to aim for that. I would say that, it's potentially the top 15 to 20% of our industry that does that really well. And and as a result, they tend to, I guess their results and their relationships and their rapport with clients, speak for themselves, and they grow, because their network grows and their referral networks grow, and it compounds, so I think that the trust, though, you can't develop trust if you don't have the capability and the knowledge to sit behind that, so any business person will see through if you're, not straight, if you're not able to articulate what it is, that they need to do or what they need to consider. So if you fail to nail that, they'll see right through it. And again, the trust won't happen. So you have to be capable. You have to know your craft, and you have to keep working on that craft. It won't stop. There's too much to know in our industry. And, I'm merely scratching the surface of, the information you need to try and hold to be able to, make it as a, reasonable operator.
Hey, we might come back to that piece. And are we doing enough in terms of the next incoming generation? Are we doing enough to try and help teach that skill set so that people see education as the keeping a tool sharp that helps engender trust and builds capability and so on? But before we head into that discussion, Alana, perhaps back to you. The consumer of today and the consumer of the future. I mean, how well are we as a sector kind of meeting those expectations according to the research?
Yeah, I mean, the research is very positive from the clients. Like, everybody, it's nearly universal in terms of like satisfaction, which is really interesting because that's not typical at all that we find in any other sectors within financial services. But where it's really interesting is when you start kind of diving into sort of behind the data. So behind that satisfaction, what actually drives it. And I think Caleb made a good point there about, the regulator and sort of slowing down that process and not actually potentially, keeping the client or the consumer in the mind for some of these things that are coming through. Because for clients, ultimately, where the value actually lies for them, for their broker, is that process in terms of choosing the correct insurance for their business and making sure, claims go through smoothly and renewals are smooth, is actually how smooth and quick and easy that process is. That actually is the value piece for them. And I don't think clients are often quite aware of what goes on in the background, and that sometimes is a good thing for them because they have, these are business owners, they have huge amount of decisions that they have to make and keep in their head on a day-to-day basis. And when their broker is able to take that part away from them in terms of that sort of mental load of the things that they have to keep in mind for that is ultimately the value that they're sort of, giving to those clients.
Yeah. Leigh, perhaps to you on this particular topic, your thoughts on the trust equation and how we help people develop that capability?
Yeah, so I think for me, and this is kind of a more broad sweeping statement than just around broking itself, but on balance, people want to do business with people they know, right? So whether that's your local insurance broker, whether that's your local butcher, whoever it is, it's doing business with someone you know, and in this case, you've engendered some trust in. So how do we actually do that, I guess, is the challenge. And I think Caleb's kind of nailed a few points there just around it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not something that's a one-off. You don't just earn someone's trust and it's like that from now until the day that you cease being in a relationship. It's actually an ongoing process to continue to refine your craft. So for us, a lot of that links back into the whole learning and development piece, Richard. So we're, as a network, on a real journey to make sure that we're continuing to upskill all of the brokers and principals in the network to make sure they're not just meeting minimum standards, but exceeding them across all measures. So I think, yeah, we've put in place a lot of frameworks around that to make things easier, but it's not something that comes easy. As I said earlier, everyone's time poor. So actually investing that time in yourself is still a conscious decision that you have to make to ensure that you're keeping abreast of everything that's going on in the industry. And that's how you're going to earn that trust, is to, at the end of the day, consumers are going to take, in a lot of cases, the path of least resistance, right? We all do that naturally. how do you ensure that they're still coming to you for advice when there's potentially an online solution that they could get? And that's just them understanding that you know their business and you know their business better than anyone else. So for me, it's around education, but it's also making sure that you've got that level of understanding of their business so that you're their first port of call when they've got a question.
Yeah, fantastic. Look, lots more to come on the consumer conversation.
Yeah.
And somewhere around Feb 18th and 19th, we will be releasing the Consumer Insight report. And in many ways, whilst Ready or Reacting asks a lot of questions, in many ways the consumer report answers them, but from a consumer perspective. So some really thought-provoking things to come out early into the new year. I'm going to just segue briefly, if we can. And there's this kind of always-on conversation in our sector around demographics, around how people join, about how accidental it all is, and ultimately about how we nurture and bring talent on. But then when talent's in, how do we grow them? How do we grow that capability and confidence? And how do we turn them from, talented young entry-level professionals into, great professional contributors to the sector, irrespective of where they sit? Caleb, I might start the conversation with you if I can. I mean, you've been around the market now for a bit. I mean, what have you seen, and what have you seen that works in terms of bringing people in and through the sector?
Yeah, look, a lot of the people that I've personally engaged with to bring in are not, it's not going to the competing broker and, trying to poach staff, from another broking house. Obviously, there's a place for that. We've sort of very intentionally gone out looking for diversity by transferable skill set, and so, I've brought anyone into the business from, say customer service, hairdresser, travel agent, real estate agent, and gone out and actually, worked out, hey, this person's got a certain skill set. I think if you can find attitude and aptitude, they're my two fundamentals. I just want someone with a good attitude. And if that happens to be, and you want it to be coupled with aptitude, because you have to be sharp to really succeed, in our world, and you have to be up for the challenge at different times. So I think that's my probably underlying principle: attitude, aptitude, and the rest you can teach. The teaching piece is very much taking them out. There's probably two things I do the most: take them out, let them sit in meetings with clients, hear the clients interact, have that live sort of engagement. In circumstances where that's not possible, I think teaching them the fundamentals of a policy structure, starting from claims. This is how it plays out at claim or at law. Watch that play out. Let them learn, I guess, reconstruct a policy, from the for the other end of it, from the business end of it, so that when they're talking to clients, it's much easier to resonate and connect with what the client need is based on how the contract's going to perform at claim.
And given the aptitude and attitude, I mean, how which sounds a fabulous approach. I mean, how successful has that been for you in your career as you've kind of moved into running and leading teams?
I don't have either of those things, Richard. It's just what I look for in other people.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah. So now, look, it's just something that I think, say, and very deliberately, attitude first, because if you get someone with attitude, that is positive, who wants to engage, who's open to learning, and they're just on, you can do anything with that person. If they want to be an extrovert and chase sales and growth, that's great. If they want to just be a really good, capable operational person in the business, you still absolutely need that, because you can't have one without the other. But you need attitude first. The aptitude part is just that willingness to learn, because when you're in, and maybe it's a little bit unique to a regional centre, but when the diversity of risk can be anything from a log contractor to an agricultural harvesting risk to a farm to a commercial property owner in a regional centre, you need to understand all of the risks that particular client and client set is exposed to. So you do have to be, on enough to be able to get across all those things before you can become, that trusted advisor, as we touched on before.
Fantastic, Leigh. Same question to you. You obviously see it scale across the country. Well, what have you seen that works in terms of talent attraction, retention, and growth?
Yeah, so I'll probably call out two pathways there. So one is very similar to what Caleb's explained, which is really getting those staff members who potentially aren't in industry and working on ways to accelerate their development. So we've done a hell of a lot of work around the education piece, Richard, just to make sure that where our brokers are bringing on people who are potentially unskilled in the world of broking, how can we accelerate that development from maybe a 2-year apprenticeship and get them all the skills that they need to be sort of functioning at a level within the first 12 months. So for us, there's kind of that education piece around what Caleb was explaining. The other side, I think, is where I've seen some significant inroads by some very, we'll go with passionate committee members at NIBA for those entry-level students coming through, whether that's through university, high school, etc. I know NIBA's done a great job in putting together a national committee on how we get sort of school leavers and the like into industry. So I think for me, there's a couple of things. There's kind of the industry-wide, how do we get more entry-level students, etc., coming in, and that can be via work experience, it can be via apprenticeships, it can be via traineeships, etc. And then the other side is how do we accelerate those who are already in a workforce somewhere and have some level of business acumen, and as Caleb said, a good level of attitude and aptitude. How do we then accelerate them to be meaningful parts of our community? Because one of the things that has really stood out to me is, as much as the majority of us stand around, and Caleb's already referenced this, that we kind of fell into the insurance broking industry. Once you're in, I can't think of too many people who have said this isn't for me and I'm moving on. Like, it is a great career path, and I think the more we can proliferate that story, the more great people are going to be joining our industry, Richard.
Yeah, because interestingly, also part of the research, and this is yet to come into the new year, Alana, we did ask all these questions, which was, how did you get in, and who got you in, and so on and so forth. Any insights you wanted to share there?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting because, all of, what Caleb and Leigh have sort of said has actually come through in the research, because we looked at that. We looked at how, people joined the insurance industry. And while at an overall level, it kind of is largely, I fell into it, I had a referral from a family or friend, or I was recruited from an industry. Where it gets quite interesting is when you start segmenting it by role. So when we look at sort of principals and owners, they're largely actually recruited from another insurance company in total, or it was another industry. For senior brokers, it's a little bit more spread out. It's generally a referral. It's generally they were also moved from an insurance company. But for our junior brokers, their top 3 reasons is 1, a referral from their family or friend, 2, another industry. And so they're like the most that were out of all the groups that were recruited from another industry, and also graduate programs. So they were also the most that have been recruited from graduate programs out of all the other role types. So it's nice to see those initiatives actually playing into real life and coming through in the research, that they are actually working. We are getting junior brokers in from other parts of the sectors, from other industries, but also things like graduate programs, and getting them in from, when they've kind of left school or university. So that works really well.
Yeah, I've just sourced your data we haven't released yet, but just to your point, 24% of new entrants came through industry referral or through family and friends. That's almost 25%. 23% are coming in from insurance companies, so changing roles within the sector, and 18%, Caleb, are coming in from another sector. There's your aptitude and attitude conversation. And to Alana's point, we can unpack that in every single role type, and it's higher or lower depending on where you play. And I think in there are some lessons for the sector about actually how we go to market with an employee value proposition. How do we go to universities or schools? NIBA's got our Ensure Your Future program, which is all about making the sector attractive to kids at school and kids in uni. But a lot of young people are coming in because their auntie, their uncle, their mum, their dad, or some kind of family business succession's taken place. So I think there's a recruiting strategy conversation across the sector to think about, because I think in the research is the seeds of our future success and obviously our current success. I might throw this one out to the panel. Probably more a comment than a question, but interesting people's observations. I think the younger generation look at life-work balance as well as money. This is what we should offer, as it's not something that school students even consider. Money is a big thing to look at. So yeah, maybe observations from the panel around kind of the work-life balance versus, it's all about the big bucks. Caleb, maybe to you first.
I just think that's a conversation with my experience. I've engaged with everyone that I am considering bringing in to the business, or potentially offering a role to, and it's understanding what their long-term, and I know this is harder when they're young and maybe don't have a real long-term view, but just understanding what they as an individual are trying to achieve. Because you have to, I believe in sort of bringing someone in, and for it to be a sustainable relationship between that person and the business, regardless of who that is, you want them to be there for a long time. So you have to understand what their drivers are as best you can at that time, and make sure that aligns with what you're doing to make sure that it can, be sustainable. So I think it's an individual thing, and whether that means, you can only work 9 till 3 or, 3 days a week, there are ways to do that to, sort your work-life balance out. But, it has to also be consummate with, you can't expect top dollar if you're not, you want to work 6 hours a week. It just won't happen.
Leigh, is in CBN, is it kind of all different models?
Yeah.
People coming back from work, part-timers, work-life balance, as well as people newbies?
Yeah, so I guess where we operate, like any sort of corporate would, in that we've got kind of a standard approach, Richard, in terms of expectations in the office. But more and more, as someone who's been recruiting staff for a long time across multiple industries, I guess post-COVID, as we all do, one of the key things, and I think in every interview, is always what's your work from home policy look like? So that's a question that 6 or 7 years ago, I don't think you would have got terribly often. So for us, that's we do have a standardized policy around that. It's kind of not dissimilar to a lot of other corporates, in that it's 3 days in the office for office staff, 2 days working from home, a couple of anchor days, that kind of thing, which is fairly bog standard. But I think to more, and I think that's what the question or the comment was alluding to, this next sort of generation are looking more towards that flexibility, looking at lifestyle choices. Like we have some flexible leave around your health and well-being. We have a health and well-being allowance, which can be put towards gym memberships and things that come through. So I think we're as best we can trying to be at the front end of that. But even looking out in the lunchroom, as I am from here, with our tennis table and the arcade machine, it's a little bit different to, I guess, what I was sort of used to banking and finance many years ago. So I feel like we are evolving, and the more offices I go to throughout the industry, I see more of that happening. So I guess, I see it, but there's probably more of that to come for us.
That's awesome.
Good
Matt.
line there, Richard. Just Leigh touched on there that we all have to. It has a direct impact on the education piece. Is that if you've got someone who's fresh from, doesn't have prior expertise and that sort of 3 or 5 years worth of knowledge working somewhere in our industry, the rate at which they can grow when just working from home and potentially doing e-learns is, in my view, at least half. So if I just think it's something we have to, it's a real sort of factor that we all have to tackle. But we need to, make sure that person and those individuals understand that, your rate at which you can grow could be, you could have an exponential uplift if you engage more with the people, with your peers, and build your interpersonal skills, outside of, chatting online to some degree.
Yeah.
And I think, the trusted advisor is someone who's present, who's available, who's often face-to-face. And of course, we have obviously a generational change in terms of how we communicate and how we use technology. And that's a whole conversation for another time. I'm going to ask each of you one last question. 2035, which is really the timeline for this bit of research. How do you think the sector's changed, grown and evolved? You've keep it short, 20 seconds, and maybe Leigh, if I can start with you.
Okay, I'll go with aggregation is the new black. It seems as I look around the industry, whether it's at a insurer or whether it's at a broker level, there seems to be more and more aggregation going on. And that's not to say brands are lost, they're just clustered together. So I think there'll be more of that coming our way.
Thanking you. Caleb?
I think it'll be more dependence on the trusted advisor relationship with a broker and their client and the market. So the insurers, let's not forget that you can't, if you don't manage both of those relationships equally, you won't succeed either. It's got to be tripartite.
Fantastic. And Alana, last word to you.
Honestly, I think really by 2035, I think the sector is on a similar trajectory to financial advisors, in that technology is really going to give way to lending for, brokers to have much more clients, but for them to just focus on that relationship piece. So they're not doing anything but going out to clients, taking calls, being part of meetings. Any of the rest of that admin piece is all automated.
Fantastic. And two last data points, folks. Also coming in research next year, the broking sector is responsible for about 53% of the total GWP over the last 10 years, currently sitting at around 76 billion. It's been growing over that 10 years at about 6.1%. And we asked brokers around their optimism and outlook for the future, which is broadly positive and constructive. And if we take the aggregate of the conversation today, I think we're in pretty good stead. Certainly not without headwinds and some challenges, but certainly plenty of opportunities. And I really liked Caleb's frame up. It's a tripartite relationship, and trust is at the center of it. Trust with your clients, trust with your suppliers, and that augurs well into the future. And so with that, at bang on 4:00, a big virtual round of applause for our three awesome panelists. Great job, folks. I commend the research to you, and watch this space as more really high quality research rolls out into the new year. But for now, thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking the time. And we'll see you on webinars and in person over the next few months. But have a great and safe Chrissy.